2 weeks ago when we started this series, we started by talking about New Year's resolutions. Did you know that after 2 weeks, most people have already given up on their New Year's resolutions? In fact, by the end of January, fewer than 25% of people are still committed to pursuing that goal. Why is that? Well, it's because achieving a goal takes a ton of hard work. And whatever goal you have right now, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. The bad news is that if you haven't already, you're going to experience some opposition and frustration and lack of motivation along the way toward achieving your goal. But the good news is that even when your goal feels like it's too much to handle on your own, or you're feeling weak or discouraged, there is hope for you in achieving your goal. I want to give you a little bit of a recap. We've been looking at the story of Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah, we find that the city of Jerusalem had been destroyed by an enemy army, but God had promised that people would one day return and rebuild Jerusalem. The Judean people slowly began to return to Jerusalem. And although there were people living there, Nehemiah finds out that the wall around the city is torn down and it's in need of repair. So Nehemiah decides that he wants to rebuild the wall to protect the city. For months, Nehemiah prayed and he planned and he prepared. And Nehemiah finally got an opportunity to go before the king and ask for permission to go repair the walls. And the king said yes. So Nehemiah recruited a team to help him, but not everyone was as excited about the idea as Nehemiah was. Once he arrives in Jerusalem, Nehemiah got to work, and we read about this in Nehemiah chapter 3. He convinced a ton of people living in Jerusalem to work together to repair the city. And Nehemiah tells us all kinds of details in chapter 3 about how the people were involved and what they had contributed. And sometimes we tend to find these parts of the Bible boring. There's so much detail and it's all these lists of people and supplies, but there's something really important about this chapter that you need to understand. This shows us just how big this project was and that it wasn't something Nehemiah did or pursued on his own. It was a complete team effort. When we get to chapter 4, we're reminded, though, that not everyone was on board. We'd met some people earlier on in the book called Sanballat and Tobiah, and they show back up to cause problems for Nehemiah again in chapter 4. They got a group of people together who harassed the people who were rebuilding Jerusalem. And these people were bullies. They called the workers weak, they mocked the quality of their work, they mocked the pain they were experiencing, they mocked their culture and beliefs. They tried to crush their hopes. And even though Nehemiah and his team were being obedient to God, they still had to deal with haters, people who didn't understand or did not like what they were trying to do. So how did Nehemiah and his team handle the opposition and the frustration? Well, if we continue on in Nehemiah chapter 4, we find that they didn't get distracted. Nehemiah stayed on course. He didn't fight with these guys. He didn't add to their drama. He didn't even really respond. Nehemiah instead took it to God. He asked God to hear his prayers and to make it right. And he wasn't afraid to be honest, even when he was frustrated and wanted those guys to be punished. And Nehemiah kept working. He kept his team on task. They kept building no matter what those guys had to say. But these bullies were relentless. And Nehemiah had to stay committed and to be strategic about how he approached it. Time and time again, he took it to God. He was in constant communication and prayer with God from the very beginning all the way through the opposition. And he prioritized rest. He made sure that the teams were working in shifts so they could find the strength to go through and do the hard tasks that were in front of them. And Nehemiah made sure that they chose community. Nehemiah's team committed to protecting and supporting each other so they could get through the opposition they were facing. And Nehemiah just kept going again and again and again. The job was much more difficult than it had been at the beginning, but Nehemiah never stopped. Instead, he moved forward, he adjusted his plan, and he got creative in order to continue the work. And I wish I could tell you that Nehemiah and his team, that once they stood up to these bullies and they were committed to doing their work, that things got easy, but instead they got more difficult. In chapters 5 and 6, we find that he has enemies not just from outside, but also from within his own people. And in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 9, we see something kind of interesting. Nehemiah has received a series of threatening letters. They're death threats that he receives. And these men, they did not want Nehemiah to finish the wall. But watch how Nehemiah reacts to the death threats. He says to God in prayer, "Strengthen my hands." Now, Nehemiah could have asked for anything. He could have asked for a conquering army to come in, or reinforcements, or for the wall to just miraculously be completed. But instead, he says, "Strengthen my hands," because Nehemiah wanted to find the strength from God to finish the work that he had set out to do. So what goal do you have in mind? Is there something you want to do, become, or change, but you're facing opposition? Keep your goal in mind as you think through this. When we're pursuing God-sized goals, we need to take it to God. Whenever you're struggling, God is there to listen to you and to communicate with you. You just need to be praying and communicating more regularly. So when you feel this opposition, take it to God. You also need to choose community. We were not designed to pursue our God-sized goals alone. We need each other. So when you're facing opposition and you're losing strength, you need someone to lean on in those moments. Surround yourself with people you trust. You also need to rest. You were not designed to hustle forever. You need to make it a priority to work hard, but you also need to make it a priority to rest well. So when you're feeling tired, weak, overwhelmed, you need to rest so you can be renewed, so you can move forward, get sleep, take care of yourself, rest. Also, you need to not get distracted. It's not your job to please everyone, and there's going to be people who raise all kinds of concerns and questions and challenge what you're doing. But if you are following God's leading and you're pursuing a God-sized goal, you can't be distracted. You've got to learn to quiet those voices. And then you've got to keep going. The opposition will come. Things will get difficult, but God is with you. God gives us strength to pursue God-sized goals.